Welcome to episode 5 of Mr. Haden's Ag Classroom. Today we will be talking about gardening. So once again, we've had a lot of rain here in Independence, so we'll have a lot of notes from our sponsors, but be it the next day is the first day of spring, I wanted to bring a topic to a lot of you that you care deeply about. If you're in Iowa, maybe you're thinking, hey, this coronavirus thing, it might be lasting longer than we think. So I wanted to touch on those of you that might be thinking about starting a garden for the first time, whether it be big or small. We'll touch on 2 different examples. And I want to make sure that you realize that you are capable of growing your own food this summer, and it can be very rewarding as well as a hobby. Now, if you're looking to make a lot of money, there's not a lot of celery in it for you. So just be aware of that from the get-go. And we're about March 20th right now. Some of the seeds that are like tomatoes and peppers, we should be starting right now if you're 8 weeks out. And we'll talk about some of those other crops that would be good to grow. So the first thing I want to start out with is when we're planting a garden, okay, whether you live in town or you live in the country, whether you have a large area or not, there's 2 things we're going to talk about. And one of those methods is called square foot gardening. And what this means is you take a 4 foot by 2 foot area and you build maybe a raised bed where you have 2x12s on the side to build the soil up. And that is our first stump up of the day. We are going to hear from Remax and Kurt Martin, where your dreams come home. And then what you do is you have your garden there and you take that 4 by 2 foot square area, and that gives you 8 square feet. And then in each square foot, you plant a different crop. So in this example right here, we have some herbs, which could be like parsley, basil, oregano, green beans, lettuce, carrots, things that aren't going to take a lot of space. You want a lot of bang for your buck in terms of the amount of produce that you can harvest. Pepper and peas, the peppers are going to take, they're more of a long season crop. These first ones up here, more of a cool season crop. So when they're done producing at the end of June, you might actually tear those up and you might be able to get another crop of another vegetable. And then at the very bottom down here, we have some cantaloupe and we also have some radish, beets, and onions. The radish, beets, and onions, those all mainly grow under the ground. They take up very little space. The other advantage of doing this is by keeping it in a small area, about the size of this table, a little bit longer, is hopefully there's enough plant density of your crop that you want to plant that it keeps the weeds down, okay? So that's kind of a good reward when you're planting and once again, you do want to come up with a list of vegetables or fruits, I should say, that you actually want to eat. So I really encourage people to come up with a list of about 15 different vegetables that you would say, hey, I would love to eat these throughout the season, and then pare those down, okay? Try to narrow that list down so you have some that are producing early in the spring that you can harvest, like we said, our lettuce, our green beans, carrots, some that are going to take longer, like our peppers, and then later even in the season, cantaloupe. And there's also the chance for a fall season crop, which that means in the month of August, as you start to cool back down, some of these plants you can start from seed again. So the ones you need to be aware of in this list right here, like we said, peppers, those would be need to transplanted, a plant that's already started, maybe 3 to 4 inches tall. Not too tall, you don't want it to be too lanky because it's going to be prone to wind damage and things of that nature. So this is our square foot gardening. So if you need to start out small, this is a good way to do it. You don't have to tear up your whole yard. That is our sump pump number 2. And we're going to thank the United States Postal Office. Rain or shine, they deliver your mail every time. And so one of the things you also have to think about there is when you're selecting your garden site, you want an area that has good soil. Well, what does good soil look like, Mr. Haden? Well, like we talked about earlier, some dark, rich, loose soil. Nothing that's super compact. In the area that you're planning on planting, there should not be water that's ponding. If the soil is saturated with water, that is going to inhibit plant growth, and you do not want that. If you're going to the work of planting all these plants, you want to make sure that they're going to produce food for you to eat and enjoyment. The other thing you want to make sure you have access to is you want to have a water supply, whether that's a hose coming from the side of your house or your own, if you have your own well, if you live on an acreage. And then the other main thing is lots of sun. Remember, the sun is the raw energy that plants need to produce their stems, leaves, roots, and also the part that you're going to harvest and eat. Okay, so one thing to think about there, I said water, soil, lots of sun, and also keep it close to your house because chances are you're not going to want to have to walk a long ways to do weeding, to harvest and things like that. The last thing that you also need to be aware of is with weed pressure, you might put down some type of grass mulch because you don't want to be out there weeding all the time. You want to be spending your time outside enjoying that activity. And just so you know, if you didn't know this, we all have actually a plant on our face. It's called the tulips. And so maybe ask your mom or dad about that if you don't understand that joke, but you'll get it eventually. And then, so this is our square foot gardening right here. Over here, we have more of a traditional garden. So what we mean here is maybe a larger area. And if you look, I've oriented at the north right here. You want your taller plants on the north side of your garden, because here in Iowa, our sun mainly comes from the southern exposure, so we're in the northern hemisphere. So you have our long season crops that are taller here. You can alternate long and short season. You could do a tomato, some type of lettuce, and then you could do your peppers here, because when that crop is done in July, you till it up and remove it, giving more space for the other crops right there. That is our sump pump number 3. We're going to look at the sanity room located here in Independence, where happy hours never end. So, and then your shorter plants right down here, you might have things like eggplant, you might have some of those tuberous plants such as your onions, radish, and then we're talking about potatoes. Potatoes are kind of a different plant as well. Those are typically planted on Good Friday prior to Easter, so there's some of the earliest things that you plant underground. And you got to be careful with potatoes. They're pretty sharp. They always have their eyes peeled. And so when you look down at the very bottom here, we notice we put all our viney crops, such as our cantaloupe, watermelon, squash, cucumber. Those viney plants, they really love sandy soils. Their root system prefers to stay dry throughout the growing season. Remember, you can always water a plant more if it lacks it, but if it's saturated all the time, you can't really fix that, right? So those viney plants, they're really going to spread out horizontally. And that's something that I forgot to mention over here is a better way to maximize your space in square foot gardening is if I have these cantaloupe, I can actually make them trellis or grow up some type of woven wire or chicken fence to maximize more of that space. You just don't want wherever it's growing vertical to be shading a different area. Go back to this over here, my viney plants right there at the very south side of my garden. And the only thing that I did not draw on the diagram is I did not put a spot for maybe potentially some perennial vegetable crops. And what we're talking about there, your rhubarb, maybe asparagus, those need to be off on the side so that way you can till up your garden every year. You do not want to plant these same annual vegetable crops year after year in the same spot, because you're going to have more intense insect problems and issues. One minor thing that if you don't want to spray anything on your garden, you can mess up an insect sense of smell by planting marigolds around the perimeter of your garden. A lot of people don't know this, but insects, they don't really look at the vegetable, they actually smell it, and that's how they know what to eat. So if you can disrupt that sense of smell, you're not going to have as much insect pressure there, okay? The other thing is, think about, some of these crops, when we grow them, they have a longer shelf life than others. Some of your leafy greens, if you cut them, that is sump pump number 4, Indy Light and Power. We keep your life lit. So when you have those green vegetables like our lettuce and leafy things, those need to be consumed relatively quickly compared to some of the other things that might keep longer. And then don't forget, in the fall, if you love pumpkins, pumpkin carving, make sure you plant those from seed late enough, probably the first week of June. And I forgot to touch on the planting time frame we're looking at. When we're planting stuff outside in Iowa, we're going on our last frost-free date, okay? What that means is roughly about May 10th, it's safe to plant our crops outside. We don't want them to freeze. And then we're looking at October 10th, roughly, as our first frost of the year, a killing frost for those plants. So I touched on a lot of things there in terms of gardening. For those of you that you just want to dig in there and get your hands dirty and try it for the first time, I would go with more of the square foot method. It can be a very rewarding thing, especially this summer if we still have to stay isolated due to coronavirus. You're going to spend some more time at home. And like I said, it just can be a very rewarding experience, okay? And some of those areas where you might love sweet corn is a crop it's going to be your tallest crop. It might go on the far north side of your garden there, okay? And then a couple sponsors that we didn't get to. Quick Star, big on fresh, low on price, located in the middle of Independence. And like I said, first day of spring tomorrow, this is the time to start thinking about your garden. If you're in isolation, you can actually draw up a garden plan. I would like to post some links in the comment section of this video that tell you the harvest time frame for a lot of these crops here in Iowa. So with that being said, I appreciate everyone listening and viewing this episode number 5 and actually the entire week. I'm going to take the weekend off because making these shows is harder than it looks, but I do appreciate your viewership, and we'll see you back on Monday.